Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle. My God, it looks like it's working. Good to be here. Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Um, Sound is, I've had a problem with microphones. Is it just really looks like low level? Let me see if I can boot that up. I knew we couldn't get off of this thing without uh, too much trouble. I've had the podcaster just kind of died on me, and I've been using this a real nice microphone, but it just can't get any levels out of it. Output. Sorry. Nerd. Hey, no, that's about all we're going to get, I think. Um, Let me double check here, make sure we got the right one on. It wouldn't be a show if it wasn't. Yeah, this is the mic, the Rode NT. This is the best we're going to get. Sorry. Hope it's okay. Um, anyway, good to hear some people saying sounds okay. Anyway, so we did a lot of science fiction last week, and we're going to stay far, far away from that just to get going. We'll do questions later. We're going to jump far afield into the world of speculative astronomy. And the reason I call it speculative astronomy is because the little hamster wheel has been running full time on this whole issue, and there's just some interesting stuff there. Obviously, it's still a little connected to science fiction, but we won't spend anything like as much time as we did on it last week. So that's about all we're going to get as far as the mic is concerned. Anyway, so I've been doing a lot of thinking about the universe and stuff, and spent a fair amount of time as I start to develop this kind of clean sheet intellectual paper that of intellectual property I talked about last time. Spent a lot of time looking out into the world and trying to see if you could tell an interstellar story with the same rules I had for the original Aurora movie back in 2005, 6, 7, which was no magic. And I've been wrestling with that nastiness for 2-3 weeks now, and I finally decided it could be done. And I actually looked at it, and let me just make one minor adjustment here. And I thought, why is there so much resistance to this? It just, well, I'm about to explain. Just 1 minute. Let me just get this thing a little more centered, and we'll be happy campers here. Do it. Do it. You miserable low-life swine. Oh, well, anyway, yeah, so here's what I'm talking about. Come on, come closer. Uh, Here's what I'm talking about. Um, I spent a lot of time in the last 2-3 weeks in what free time I have doing a lot of research on whether there's a crack in the door for faster than light travel, and um, and like I said, this is an ongoing project, and for those of you tired of hearing about it, I promise you it will not be the whole show or anything like as long as last time. But um, if you're gonna set up the science fiction universe, this kind of property, and hopefully some kind of franchise, you got to figure out what the rules are, uh, and then you got to stick to those rules. So everybody out there that I'm aware of has some form of faster than light travel. They got warp drive, or they got wormholes, or they've got the stutter warp, which I liked a lot in Traveler 2300, where they basically get you to quantum tunnel the whole ship. You just cycle it thousands or millions of times a second. That's clever too. But I really looked it over hard, and I have been looking it over my entire life, honestly, and it's just not there. Uh, the whole warp drive thing is theoretically possible. Is it Alcubierre? I can't get that name right. Mexican astronomer mathematician did the math, said that you could in fact warp space in front of a vehicle and then behind it push it through space-time without violating relativistic problems, because the bubble would be moving, blah blah blah. The part that's not there is the fact that in order to do this, you need the energy output of the galaxy or something to warp space. Um, so it's just out. Um, the Sometimes, as people pointed out with Dune, sometimes it's just a wish. I wish I were here, or psychic powers, and that's a non-starter for me. Wormholes have been popular lately. Did a lot of looking into wormholes. It appears that they do exist. They're certainly predicted and allowed by relativity, but if you look at the cross section of it as it interacts with space-time, it does not lead to space in this universe. And furthermore, they say that while the wormholes may in fact exist, they're probably just a few nanometers across, and they close so quickly that not even light can get through them. That sounds like more than an engineering problem to me. So if I'm thinking about something 200 years in the future, I'm dividing the world of astronomy up into engineering problem and physical impossibility built into the structure of the universe. Then I've already said this is all the microphone that we have today. Sorry, it's just doing the very best I can. It's up all the way to 11. It's all the way to 11. So that's it. That's what we got. Anyway, so I'm dealing with engineering problems versus physical impossibility, and so that's the world we're stuck in. So I'm completely distracted about the microphone thing now. It's this is not the microphone I usually use. The other one isn't working. It's USB. The other one was USB. I've got an amp on the other thing, but this is what we got, and this is what we got. So anyway, so the conclusion I've come to is is that we want faster than light travel very, very, very much, because we don't like the travel times involved. There's no real engineering problems with slower than light travel. I'm saying, as I said before, an engineering problem is a technological issue, as opposed to something that is a violation of the laws of physics that are repeatedly proven every day. So I don't know why. I think this is an interesting topic for discussion. Won't get into it tonight, but maybe next time, or next time we do a science fiction show. Why people of my generation grew up with Star Trek and Star Wars and all the rest of it. Why is the desire for faster than light travel so overwhelmingly powerful that you'll do almost anything to hang on to it? Because it is looking pretty much absolutely impossible across the board, and the universe appears to be built that way, and that makes sense to me. But it's like, no, there must be a way. There must be a way. There's got to be a crack. There's got to be a crack here, a crack there. No, it doesn't appear to be. Gravity, in terms of warping space, the thing that most people don't realize is how unbelievably weak a force gravity is. It's astonishingly weak force. And if you think about it, if you have a little regular old magnet, horseshoe magnet, like in your high school days, and you pick up a paper clip, then this little magnet is out pulling the entire Earth. That's how much stronger magnetism is than gravity. Gravity is an astonishingly weak force, and to generate it, to make it, is hard. But in any event, I've decided I'm going to build this thing out. I'm going to use real stars. I'm going to use real solar systems. And I'm going to travel at sublight speeds that may get occasionally as high as 0.9 C. As you get faster and faster, time slows down on the ship. That's good, but the ship becomes more massive, more virtually massive. You have to push harder and harder. And if it's not exponential, it sure looks exponential. So you can get to 0.9 C without too much increase in the mass of the ship, but then 0.95 is tough, and then 0.96 is very tough. 0.97 is much, much harder, and finally, by the time you get to 0.99, it's, the ship weighs as much as the universe does. So that's why you can't go faster than the speed of light. But I thought about this quite a lot, and so I'm not going to get into the science fiction end of it any more than this, but the speculative astronomy end I am very interested in. And here's one of the things that I'm interested in because I didn't know about this until just a short time ago. And that surprises me because I usually keep up on these things. Make sure I get the name right. Hang on one sec. There is, needless to say, an explosion a genuine explosion in the list of actually discovered planets out there. Um, I remember when it was like, wow, they found 6 or 7 or 10. I don't know what it is now. I think it's over 1,000, probably well over 1,000. But here's something I'm very interested in, and I'll tell you why. I am interested in. Sorry, make sure I get that number right. Yeah, I am interested in a star called lumen 16, and the reason I'm interested in lumen 16 is because it was discovered. Hang on. Well, in any event, it's fairly recent. So here's the thing about lumen 16 as an example. I knew my closest star list like the back of my hand. It's just what I grew up with in the Miami Planetarium and being interested in astronomy and all of that stuff. And so I've always known them, and I've known them in order. And it was always Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri, distant red dwarf companion to a type G, type K binary star called Alpha Centauri. So it's A, B, and then C. That's 4.3 light years away, roughly. And then next was Barnard Star. And then after that, you just started walking the park. And all of a sudden, here comes lumen 16. Where did it come from? It wasn't there when I looked last. Now it's the third nearest star to our solar system. It wasn't there for virtually all of my life. So what happened and why is it important? Well, lumen 16 is a brown dwarf. It's not a red dwarf. Those are difficult to detect. Most stars in our galaxy, most stars in the universe are red dwarf stars. They're much smaller than the sun, and not only smaller, they have far, far lower luminosity than the sun. And while the sun burns for, I don't know, what's 12 billion years, somewhere in that neighborhood, red dwarf stars consume their fuel so slowly that they can last for trillions of years. And so, but this is not that. A brown dwarf is an object that is larger than Jupiter, but smaller than a red dwarf. And that means that it doesn't have enough mass, there's not enough inward force to compress the core of that supergiant Jupiter. It looks like Jupiter, but significantly bigger, and it's glowing. But it's not glowing from nuclear reaction like the sun is. If it were just a little bigger, there would be enough gravitational pressure to force the core of a brown dwarf into nuclear fusion. There'd be enough gravitational crunch to fuse hydrogen atoms into helium, and then it would light up as a red dwarf star, which are dim, relatively speaking, and relatively hard to detect, but nevertheless, they glow. They're visible. Lumen 16 is a binary brown dwarf system. So imagine two enormous Jupiters in orbit around each other, and instead of it emitting the kind of light you would get from a star, it's detectable because even though it's not a star, it's still very, very hot. The reason it's hot is because even though that pressure in the center of the brown dwarf is not enough to actually fuse hydrogen, it is hot enough to radiate a great deal of thermal heat just from the compression forces and so on. So here's why all of this gets really, really, really interesting. Lumen 16 is the third, after Alpha Centauri and Barnard Star, it's the third closest system to our sun that we know of so far. And that is not something I never thought I'd hear myself say. That's new. I thought things like discovery of planets around other stars, that's hard, and it is. And what they're doing is amazing. It used to be, in the early days, the only way you could detect a planet, and when I say the early days, I mean 10, 20 years ago, you could detect a planet by watching a little dip in the light of the planet, of the star rather, when, if you were lucky enough, if the orbital plane was just pointed directly at Earth and a planet passed in front of the star, it would dip the light of the star. You could get the period of the planet from that, and you'd look for it again, and sure enough, there it would be. So that's a dip due to occultation. Planet comes between you and the star that it orbits way out there. But now they're able to determine planets around stars that are not, by happy coincidence, aimed sideways directly at us. They can tell from unbelievably minute shifts in radial velocity. They can detect whether a planet is orbiting that star by watching it shift side to side, essentially. And as the equipment gets more sensitive, they're able to determine more and more planets and smaller ones, and so on and so on and so on. So here's where this whole thing gets kind of interesting. First of all, on a giant theoretical level, the universe is expanding, and it shouldn't be. If we look at there's things wrong. What we're seeing doesn't match what we expect. There's either not enough mass or gravity's not strong enough. But I'm not going to get into all of that right now. I'll get into that some other time. But basically, they've postulated something called dark matter to make the universe weigh as much as it's supposed to, according to relativity, and to match observations and stuff. And so they come up with something called dark matter and dark energy. Nobody knows what these things are. They're hypothetical constructs designed to put a cork in a hole of a theory, and that tells you that theory is due for some work. And this is not new. They've been searching for the grand unified theory that ties gravity, the strong force, the weak force, and electromagnetism together, and we don't have that yet. But the discovery of a binary brown dwarf pair this close to the solar system, just by luck, essentially, means that these things could be far, 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 far more common than we ever thought. And that the entire galaxy could just be littered with them. I mean, could just be littered with them. There may be, in fact, beginning to take a point where I'd be willing to take a bet on it. There may be brown dwarfs closer than lumen 16, and they may be closer than Alpha Centauri, and they may not be more than a light year or two away. You just never know. They're obviously very difficult to detect, but we're getting better and better and better at all of this. So the stepping stones are much smaller. They're not so far apart. If you're going to have to get on the old slow boat to China and take a 10-year trip to Alpha Centauri at half the speed of light, you may be able to go places that are not as far from point to point because of the presence of these brown dwarfs. Now, would you want to visit a brown dwarf system? Well, now we get to the stuff that's actually been kind of fun for me during the last week. There's software out there. It's advertised as free. I think you can get it, older versions for free at the website. You can get new versions for pay. I think it's like $27 or something at Steam. And it's not a game, so let's not fly into a panic. But it is an amazing piece of software called Space Engine, and Space Engine is essentially a universe simulator. There's another one called Universe Sandbox that allows you to play with the physics, but Space Engine doesn't do that. Space Engine is a very beautiful sim. But what Space Engine basically has is it's got the actual positions of hundreds of thousands of stars. In fact, I saw there's a plugin you can install for Space Engine that has the actual positions of 14 million stars in their correct position relative to each other. And I haven't installed that yet because they say it slows your system down, but 14 million actual stars in their actual positions. But certainly, even without that installation, all of the brightest stars in the galaxy and most of the recognizable stars are there, including everything out to several hundred light years is there. And so that's a great tool to do some exploring with. The reason I found out about lumen 16, I've been off of my astronomy, and I'm a little actually ashamed and embarrassed about that because I should have heard about this when it happened. But the reason I discovered lumen 16 was it showed up in Space Engine. So if you download the high quality Earth and Jupiter systems, they're very, very, very good. But I'm zooming out because you can zoom out to the scale of the macro universe where you're looking at clusters of galaxies, just rolls in one continuous scroll. So I'm zooming out. Oh, there's Alpha Centauri and Proxima, fantastic. Oh, there's Barnard Star, great. And we're looking for the next one, which, what the hell is this? And it turns out it's lumen 16, these brown dwarfs. So far, so good. But the person who wrote Space Engine, who obviously knows their astronomy extremely, extremely well, is able to do things that are actually relatively simple. And that is, if we know the temperature of a star and we know from the Whittle how far away a planet is and how big it is, at the very least, we know what the temperature would be at that distance from the brown dwarf. We got a good idea of what the actual surface temperature of the brown dwarf is and so on. Turns out that these solar systems are, that planets orbiting these brown dwarfs, and there appear to be at least one, would be exceedingly cold. But most everything is pretty exceedingly cold anyway. So here's where it gets really interesting. In Space Engine, the guy that wrote it, and it seems to be an awful lot of open source work too, basically looked at what we assumed the population of red dwarf stars would be, and it's very high in our galaxy. And he also made an assumption on what the population of brown dwarfs might be. And so you can elect to run Space Engine using real stars only, which are stars that we know about or discovered, or you can also add the option to turn on procedural stars and planets. And procedural stars are an extrapolation of what we know. And they're basically saying, look, if it took us until, I don't remember when, it'd be nice to know what the date was, when it was, a lot of stuff on it. And looks like 2010, 11. That's before they really got it locked down. So so this thing is, 10 years old or less. And it's the third closest object to our solar system. So basically, what the guy at Space Engine did was, he said, if there are that many objects like this that are so difficult to detect lurking this close to the solar system, and we do a postulation and a thumbnail sketch and so on, we can procedurally generate red dwarfs, but especially brown dwarfs, where we'll put them in a random place, but we will put them in a random place appropriate for what we think the density is. Anyway, then all of a sudden, the universe gets a lot more crowded, a lot more interesting on the interstellar scale, and that's the scale I'm interested in right now. So, so now I have to decide, well, what rules do I want to play by? You can literally check a box in Space Engine and say, I just want to see real stars. And you can also check a box that say, I want to see real planets. In other words, one of the thousands of exoplanets that have actually been discovered. And that's interesting. You can have a box check where you say, I want to see only real stars and the real planets, but also show me procedural planets. In other words, what would we expect a solar system to look like based on what we know about solar system creation? That puts a lot more stuff out there. And then if you check the box that says use real stars and procedural planets, you get further away from what is factually known, but you probably get closer to what is really real. Does that make sense? The discovery of lumen 16 means, let me rephrase that. The fact that it took so long for us to discover lumen 16 while it is so close to us is an indication that these things may be out there in huge numbers, much closer than we thought. Very difficult to detect. It's still, 6-7 light years away, something like that. And so, while we only know of 1 or 2 of these brown dwarfs, I want to say that Space Engine has 3 or 4 of them that have been already detected for real. But the fact that something was just lurking outside our back door there and we didn't see it means that there are undoubtedly a lot more of them out there than we've discovered yet, and we will start to discover more of them. This is another revolution in astronomy. I thought the discovery of exoplanets was exciting, and it is. It's very exciting. But the discovery of near let's just call them landing pads, um, because, and this is where it really gets cool, brown dwarfs are not powered by nuclear reaction. That means they're, compared to a star, they're very cold, but they're still thousands of degrees hot. And if you got into an orbit close enough around a brown dwarf star, there would be enough heat generated, not through nuclear fusion, but just through regular gravitational contraction leading to just infrared radiation. If you got close enough to it in orbit, you'd have a life zone. And it'd be real small, but you could theoretically be in there. And there's evidence that these things have their own planetary systems. So if you think of a brown dwarf as a giant Jupiter, a much bigger Jupiter, but smaller than a red dwarf, then you look at Jupiter, which throughout my childhood had 12 moons, but I want to say now has 61 or whatever, and continues to rise. It's probably, when you get right down to it, it's probably hundreds of, if not thousands of individual rocks in orbit around Jupiter. And so basically the guy with Space Engine, what he's done is he's basically said, here's what we know. Here's what we know about our solar system. Here's what we know about what we've already discovered. And here's what we know about real stars and the presence of things that have not been easy to detect. So therefore, let's assume as an option, and I like the fact that it's an option, you just turn it on or off. Let's invent systems that in a density and at distances that, while may not be accurate, are most likely representative of what the actual neighborhood looks like. And so I decided to go with, temporarily anyway, with procedural stars and procedural planets. And that about triples the total number of places to go within 15 light years of the Earth, which I'm going to decide is my furthest limit. It's roughly 5 parsecs, something like that, 3 parsecs. It's a very, very interesting proposition. Most of these things are going to be very cold, but at the very least, you've got these giant things out there that are sources of hydrogen, and that means, hey man, you know, it's a place to refuel. You got to slow down again and so on. But if the universe is littered with these brown dwarfs, and I mean really, really littered with them, because the calculations, it's been a while since I checked and things are changing so fast, but there's not nearly enough matter in the universe to explain what we see. But if there are not just like 1 or 2 of these things out there, but if they're just thick as thieves out there, just trillions of them, just blobs of matter that just didn't make it. They weren't big enough to light. Even as a red dwarf, there are so many more red dwarfs than visible stars. So, well, as Helios 1776, great name, points out, there's enough there, we just don't detect it. That's exactly what I mean. We don't detect it. But the point is, what if it's not dark matter? What if it's not all of this exotic stuff? What if interstellar space is just filled with stuff that we never really thought of because we couldn't see it? And we have evidence that this might be the case because, as I say, it took us till 2010 or later to discover one that's just right here. Yes, baryonic matter, real matter, actual matter. It's not exotic, it's just stuff. So here's what we know about the galaxy. We know that it's a very small number of like really super bright stars like type A stars like Sirius and so on. OB, AF, GKM, Obia, Fine Girl, Kiss Me. Right now, we're assuming there's also R, N, and S. And there's probably more letters now. It's probably growing as fast as the RGBQ, TTR, TL, MN, OR, RQ, TR thing. But think about it for a second. It's actually pretty amazing. If you take this to a potential conclusion, not the inevitable conclusion, but a potential conclusion, then there could be tons and tons of stuff between here and Alpha Centauri. There could be. And in fact, there probably are. So now, all of a sudden, if you think about our stellar neighborhood, the real stellar neighborhood, if you think about it as the Pacific Ocean, where you got an island here and you have to go a long little on the way, and there's another little speck of an island here, um, then it's possible that between these two islands there are reefs or just rocks that nevertheless break the surface. And if it breaks the surface, then you can hang on to it and you can sit there and you can wave and ask for help. You're not in the ocean. So it's really, really intriguing. And this space engine really opened my eyes to a lot of things, made me a lot more comfortable about doing this thing in the real world, is, with slower than light travel, because I think it gives you an awful lot more opportunities. There's one more piece of speculative astronomy I'll talk about, and then yeah, that'll be about just right on time, and then we'll get to the questions. So I'm looking at Space Engine, which again is not a game. It is a astronomical simulation that is extremely true to life, and you have the option of adding some speculation. It's also based on science if you want to. But it's taken the existing number of exoplanets and taken a look at what kind of planets they are, and has basically extrapolated what we might expect to see based on the real data, the real actual astronomy data that's coming back in. Now, if you take a look at Space Engine as an example, and you start checking out all of the nearest solar systems, as I did, you don't get a lot of Earth-like planets. They're just ungodly rare. As a matter of fact, the thing that's kind of cool about Space Engine, I just like this from a weaponized autism approach. Because Space Engine is generating stars and planets procedurally, and since those calculations remain the same from one person's version of Space Engine to another person's version of Space Engine, what that means is you can actually explore the entire universe. It's real stuff, including things like galaxies and star clusters and so on, and the nearest stars are all real. The further away you get, the more procedurally you're generating things to fill in the gaps, but you're filling in the gaps according to the way it would look out there. You're taking what we know in terms of granularity here, and you're applying that same granularity out there where we can't quite see the granularity, but we know what it is. Now, what I mean by kind of cool is that there are people out there apparently who just sit on Space Engine and just go looking for Earth-like planets. They just go hunting them, and they're out there because the random number seed is constant. All of the procedural stuff comes down from this initial starting point, and so 1,000 people with Space Engine will get the same results if they go to the same stars, and so they're done procedurally. It's not like somebody planted Easter eggs there. And so they just search for thousands of light years trying to find Earth-like planets. And they have something that was, now this I'm not sure, something ELI, or this is, it's not quite right. 3 initials. It's how close is this planet to Earth in terms of similarity. So Earth is 1, and a planet that's 0.999 is very much like the Earth. You can't get more like the Earth than the Earth is, so 1 is the unachievable ideal. But in the little time I've spent, excuse me, looking around, I find that there's a star engine community out there that basically says, I found a 0.997, and it's 17,000 light years away. So here's the other piece of speculative astronomy that I'm going to engage in that I think is reasonable, so that I can say to myself, no, we're not going to use any magic on this. We're gonna do a world, a universe, a science fiction property, franchise, whatever you want to call it, that's based on reality. It give you 200 years of engineering to solve any problem that is an engineering problem, but no breaking the rules. By the way, when I was thinking about this, I was talking to my friend Phil, who just in the space of, I don't know, an hour put together a tremendous spreadsheet that allows me to say if I accelerate at 1G for 20 days or 200 days, what's my velocity? I shut the engines off for that period of time and I coast for 9 years, and then I turn them back on again and do a 1G deceleration for 200 days or whatever. How far do I go? It's great. And I was saying that when I'm thinking about this, trying to keep things real, or at least in the real world, I feel like I'm an attorney on like a really badly written um, court drama. And what I mean by that is it's like, um, you know, like take artificial gravity, which I've been thinking about. I'm not talking about spinning centrifuges, I'm talking about generating gravity. Uh, no one knows how to do it. As I said before, gravity is an exceedingly weak field, but there's nothing that I can see that makes it illegal. There's nothing about being able to generate gravity that is a violation of the way the universe is built in the way that faster than light travel is, because faster than light travel also has causality problems, which is why I think the universe is built that way. I don't know why it's built that way, but it seems to be built that way. So while I'm at this stage, I'm saying no, faster than light travel, no matter how much I want it, it's off. It's impossible. It's physically impossible. It's not a question of technology. Generating gravity is not off the table. It's just we don't know how to do it. We don't really know what gravity is, and it looks like it would take a hellacious amount of energy, which brings me to some other thought processes that, I don't know, 40 people find interesting. We don't know how to generate gravity, and we may never find out how to generate gravity. But I did think that if we set this thing 200 years in the future, it got me thinking, what happens if we look 200 years into our past? If we go to 1820, no one has generated electricity. We have an idea of what electricity is, but no one's done it. Pretty sure it was Faraday, I want to say 1830, 1836, something like that. Comes up with a capacitor, and then he comes up with a generator, a dynamo. And so it's 1836 before humans are able to generate electricity in a lab just to make any kind of a current. So that was 200 years. So 200 years ago, no one knew how to generate electricity. We knew electricity was there. We didn't know anything about it. We just were starting to get a handle on it, and we couldn't make any of it. That's 1820. 1920. By the turn of the century, you're starting to see cities dealing with electrical power and so on, and then more and more electrical power. By the time you get to the 20s, you start to see electrified grids in cities, houses in cities running on electricity. Virtually the entire country is dark at night because that's not something we had the electrical net for yet. But cities were largely lit by electrical power, mostly lit by electrical power in 1920. But if you stood, as I've stood many times on Mulholland Drive overlooking LA, and you look down at what you see now in 2020, which is an electrical grid that extends to the horizon in virtually every direction. Absolutely out of the question in the 1920s. You could just look down and see a cluster of buildings, it'd be lit by electricity. But this endless sheet of glowing lights to the horizon, which is what we have today, is inconceivable in 1920. But it is possible. So if you took an engineer from 1920 and brought him to 2020 and showed him the LA basin, he'd be amazed, but he would know how to do it. If you took somebody from 1820, however, and showed it to them, they would not only be amazed, but they wouldn't know how to do it. So I'm using that kind of as my model for being able to generate artificial gravity to some degree. It's one of the four forces. That means there's some relationship between gravity and electricity, magnetism, the strong and weak force. We don't know what that looks like. We don't know. I suspect that what's going to happen, and this is the way I'm going to bet, that we will figure out what gravity is, we'll figure out a way to generate it, and then in order to have a significant amount of it, enough to keep you on a flat plane in space, for example, just you, I think it's going to take electrical power that is virtually inconceivable to us right now. But that is an engineering problem. That's not it's impossible problem. So as I was mentioning, my thought processes during the last couple weeks and months have been, especially the last week or two, I've been like a lawyer in a bad TV drama. And I basically say, now let's talk about artificial gravity. And then reality says, objection, Your Honor. And then the judge turns to me and says, I'm going to allow it, but be careful, counselor. that kind of thing. Um, so, the last piece of speculative astronomy before we move on, perfect timing, is this. Space Engine is using known stars and known planets with 100% accuracy. It's generating procedural stars and planets with what we think our best guess is, and I'm satisfied with that. But they're not producing very many Earth-like planets. In fact, virtually none. And in order to tell a science fiction story about with interstellar scope, you got to have a reason to want to go from point A to point B. And that means you got to have a reason for people to at least be able to live there with, it doesn't have to be paradise, but it's, plenty of real estate in the solar system. If you're going to live on a frozen rock, you might as well live on a frozen rock in the solar system. No reason to go live on a frozen rock circling Proxima Centauri. So I have to tweak this, and I have to do it in a way that's consistent with the laws of physics. And so here's my final piece of speculative astronomy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what Space Engine generates procedurally, meaning I don't touch it. I don't touch it. It's not me just fooling around. But what I am going to do is this. I'm going to assume something that I think is an important point. When people talk about global warming and climate change, and they're convinced that the Earth is going to die and we're all going to drown, or we're going to burn or whatever. This is something I've been thinking about for quite a long time now, a decade at least, seriously, in terms of the politics of it. The reason that I'm not worried about the Earth burning or freezing, a little more worried about freezing, is because there are feedback loops, feedback mechanisms in place. And a real simple one is the Earth's water, or the ocean, absorbs more light than clouds do because they're darker. It's called albedo, reflected light. So if you have a planet that's nothing but ocean, it reflects a certain amount of light and absorbs a certain amount of light. If you have nothing but clouds, it reflects more light, and so on. So if you've got a planet and the planet starts to get warmer, that means there's more water vapor because it's evaporating more easily. More water vapor means it gets cloudier. Cloudier means it cools down because it's reflecting more light into space. There's a finely tuned feedback loop that keeps the Earth's temperature more or less constant. We've had ice ages, obviously. We've had times when there were no ice caps at all, and there was an inland ocean where Kansas used to be. But nevertheless, relative to the grand scheme of things, runaway temperatures, 200, 300, 400 degrees Celsius or 200, 300 degrees Celsius below, it doesn't go into those boundaries. And so my final piece of speculative astronomy that I've been working on is this. I happen to believe in this panspermia idea that the building blocks of life are essentially scattered throughout the universe, just part of the way the universe is built, that the building blocks of life are everywhere and maybe came to Earth through comets and so on. This is a well-developed and pretty plausible theory of things just in terms of the building blocks and so on. So my final leap is going to be this. I'm going to go into Space Engine and I'm going to find any planet, I'm not touching that. I'm not going in and making things the way I want, but I'm going to look at every single system out to 15 light years, and I'm going to look at where the habitable zone would be. And if there's a planet in that area, I'm going to assume that life developed there, and then that life is turning that into a more Earth-like planet because that's what life does. That if you took the biological life off of the Earth, you would have a runaway cinder block or a runaway snowball one way or another. I'm convinced this is true, utterly convinced that it's all a feedback mechanism. And so basically what I'm going to do is if Space Engine says, hey, look, there's a 4,000 mile wide planet, half the size of Earth, and it's got 0.4 gravity and so on, but it's at this distance and it's at this temperature, then if I find that, I'm going to go in and I'm going to tweak it and make it more Earth-like. I'm going to, they've said it's got no atmosphere, I'll disagree. And I'll just do it that way, which sounds to me like a pretty reasonable way and a believable way to keep this whole thing for people who are really like hard science nerds. we've said many times before, we're talking about this last time with Crimson Tide, it doesn't matter if you know astronomy. If it sounds real, it'll feel real. And the people that do know astronomy or know what it's like to be on board a nuclear ballistic submarine, they get the actual bonus. I'm trying to find something that's different. And so I'll close this part of the show by saying that I mentioned earlier that there's a burning desire for us to believe in faster than light travel, because what it does is it allows us to see things that we can't see yet. And the solar system is fascinating, and you could explore the solar system for the rest of time. But there's nothing in the solar system that allows you to get out, walk around, and take your helmet off. And that's what people want. I'm not talking about anything now other than their entertainment desire, their storytelling need is to be able to go to a different planet, take off your helmet, and then live there. Because if we didn't have that need, we wouldn't have to invent hyperlight travel. We just explore the solar system. There's plenty of stuff here. But it doesn't satisfy us on some level as an audience. It doesn't, and I'm not entirely sure why. I've got some ideas, but it doesn't kick us. It doesn't give us like, ugh. Now, needless to say, it's also much cheaper if you can shoot a TV show, let's say, out in Red Rocks or wherever, and this is the alien planet because there's like big rocks here. So Captain Kirk can fight the Gorn captain there, and it'll feel like an alien planet. So, but my point is, if you're going to do this with CG, you can do it any way you want to. What is it about it that makes people so desperately looking for any kind of crack in the faster than light limit? We want to go and see places where we could step outside. That could be another home. That's what the drive of science fiction is. I want to see another Earth, and I want to see this, and I want to see that. But that's what it's about. That's what it's about. So otherwise, we would be perfectly happy exploring the solar system in our science fiction, and it looks like The Expanse are the only people taking that seriously. Okay, so the reason for me that it is such a big appeal is because the faster than light appeal is because I'm too lazy, and so is everybody else, to do the follow-up brain work that's required if you decide you're going to obey the law. In other words, it's easier for any science fiction writer to tell a story when you want to go from here to that magic place that exists where you can live without a helmet. I don't want to take 12 years to get there or 15 years to get there. I want to get there in the time that the plot tells me I need to get there. I want to get there in 6 days or 4 hours, or you look like Alien type movie, maybe you'll be sleeping for, I don't know, 10 months to get back to Earth. We're on the outer rim. We're going to go to sleep for another 10 months. The reason they do that is because they don't want to face the consequences of reality. The consequences of reality are, if it took 30 years to get back, they'd have to deal with the fact that everything has changed, which they happen to do in Aliens, because Ripley is apparently traveling at hyperlight speeds, but she misses the solar systems or the inner core, and they catch her on the way out, and she's been gone for 50 years or whatever it is. So it's laziness. And lack of imagination is probably a better term. Yeah, that's exactly right. Anyway, I can never get that name. Anyway, faster than light, luxury. Yeah, it is. It's a luxury. So just to wrap this up, if you start thinking about what an interstellar human civilization would look like, it seems to me that specific impulse, the ability to get a rocket engine to perform magically, is an engineering problem. It's just a question of how hot can you get the stuff you push out the back end. If you use chemicals, you can get it so hot. If you use a fission reactor, you can get it hotter. If you use a fusion reactor, you can get it even hotter. If you use antimatter, you can get it hotter than that. And the hotter it is, the more violently expands, the more thrust you get, and so on. So I think a sustained 1G, 2G, 1G burn for 200 days, 300 days, no problem. That's an engineering issue, and I'm not going to worry myself with that. I'm just not. 100 years ago, airplanes were traveling at 30 miles an hour. So if you go there, then you realize that what seems to be likely is that if you got to another solar system, you would have a lot of traffic inside that solar system, local traffic. You're going to take stuff from this place and take it to that place, and we're going to take that stuff and move it over here. And that would be the rough equivalent of sailing across the English Channel from Calais to Dover, let's say. In-system travel with advanced rockets. By the way, if you do a 1G burn, I forget what the numbers are. I just sent them to Phil. It's something like if you have a ship that'll burn 1G continuously, you're at Mars in 3 days. You're at Jupiter in 6 or 7 days, and you're at Pluto in a month. So you can definitely get around the solar system. That scale, piece of cake. But going from one solar system to another is a much bigger deal. And so what I've been thinking about is that there would be large numbers of small ships in system that are doing all the business of in system, and they're doing all the local trade and stuff. And then there would be actual starships, which my friend Steve Stipp calls dromedaries, like camels, basically. And I think these things would be enormous because they would have to be insanely expensive, trillions of dollars to do. But if you had these giant, enormous starships, you'd load them with regular spaceships and unload them. And then instead of sailing across the English Channel, this would be the rough equivalent of the Spanish treasure fleet coming once every year, which is what they did. They'd sail out to the New World. They'd steal as much gold and silver as they can, load it onto as many galleons as it took, and then they'd sail the treasure fleet back. It would come back once a year. And it was an incredibly gigantic undertaking. And that's what I think is going to happen. That's how I'm going to play it anyway. So you're in another solar system, and you've got solar system travel, and maybe you've just got colonies, and there's nothing particularly habitable. Maybe there's a world that's better than Mars, but not as nearly as good as Earth, and so on. But you could make something out of it, so you've got a reason to go there. And then if you've got all of this constant trade going on within the system, that's great. And then depending on how much of the sticks you were in, you would get a starship arriving. And if the starship took 10 years to travel there, fast at slower than light travel, then you'd get one every 10 years. But if there were 10 of them in service on that route, you'd get one every year. And you wouldn't care. You wouldn't care if it left 10 years ago. You'd only know that there's one coming in March. And likewise, if you're on the crew of that vessel, you're not going to care if it takes 10 years. Because as I mentioned with the aliens thing, if you hibernation, slowing humans down, putting them into a state of near suspended animation, engineering problem, no problem with that. That can easily be done. I did a just massive amount of research on that, and I'm convinced that get in this thing and you go to sleep, you wake up on the other end fine. I'm not depending on time dilation, because if you go fast enough for time dilation, you get mass problems. But anyway, so where's the problem is what I'm saying. Where's the problem as a writer? Now, I'm not talking about as a scientist, as a writer. Where's the problem? The problem is that, well, where is the problem not? Not a problem if your journey time is 10 years or 10 months or 10 weeks. You get into the thing, it closes, you go to sleep, you wake up, you get out. It doesn't matter if it's 10 years, 10 months, 10 weeks, or 10 days. It doesn't matter. If you've got enough of these starships coming from system to system, it doesn't matter that it takes 15, 20 years or 6 years or whatever to get from one to the other. As long as there's enough of them in motion, it's essentially a conveyor belt. There's stuff that's coming from Epsilon Indi constantly, and there's stuff that's going there constantly. And if it takes 15 years to get there, it doesn't really matter. As long as there are enough of these things in service, then you get a package every 6 months, and so far so good. So that doesn't matter. What matters? And what I realized the problem is that the problem becomes time desynchronization. That's the problem. I'm not talking about physics. I'm talking about storytelling now. If I have a crew of a ship that's an exploration vessel, let's say, which is one of the things I'm going to do, and this thing's got real powerful engines, and carries a lot of fuel, which is probably carbon, probably just diamond ground industrial diamonds. Push it into an antimatter containment field and gives you a big old energetic reaction. So if I've got a story where I've got a crew, an exploration crew, and I'm going to send them out on a journey that's, let's say, I'm going to send them 10 light years out, and it's going to take them 14, 15, 16 years to get there. So far, so good. They close the thing, they fall asleep. They wake up on the other end, fantastic. They're on their own. Radio signals might be coming, but it's coming from Earth, and the data you're getting from the radio signals is 10 years old, so you're not able to get on the phone and call back and say, here's what's going on. So basically what happens is if you take an exploration ship and you send it to a solar system that nobody's been to before, you have essentially taken them out of the universe and put them in their own universe. There's nothing there. It's just them. Communication with, it's not that you can't communicate with Earth, it's just you can't communicate with Earth instantly. It's going to take 10 years for your message to get there and another 10 years for an answer. So you are essentially, while you may be hearing what the latest baseball scores are, being the baseball scores of 10 years ago, you basically are alone. And this is what I want. This is what the Star Trek was based on, the Horatio Hornblower stories. The idea that the captain of a Royal Navy ship on the other side of the world is disconnected from any authority. He is the British Empire. That's exactly what Roddenberry wanted when he made Star Trek. He wanted Captain Kirk to be the Federation. He doesn't have to call for permission. He doesn't have to do any of it. Now, the thing that you get with Star Trek that you don't get in the real world is you send Captain Kirk out on a 5-year mission. He comes back 5 years later, and he's, oh, look, Starfleet has changed quite a bit in 5 years. He's been to every planet in the galaxy during that 5-year period. If you don't, if you have to live with the speed limit, then the Enterprise goes out on a 5-year mission, and a third of the way to its destination, its mission is over. Its 5 years are done. So the dramatic problem that creates is that if you have a world where interstellar travel is slower than light, you can have Captain Kirk take the ship out on the conscious equivalent of a 5-year mission. In other words, we'll go to this planet system, we'll explore it for 2.5 years, then we'll go to another one, we'll explore it for 2.5 years, we'll come home. The problem is when he comes home, it's 30 years later. Anyway, that's the speculative astronomy portion of our program. Why don't we go to Facebook and take some questions? Most of the time, the show is just a way for me to figure out things for myself, really, just by speaking out loud into the void. All right, so here we go. We'll just take them in order. Yeah, we have plenty of time. Steve Young. New York Attorney General seeks to dissolve the NRA with a lawsuit. Sideways attack on the Second Amendment. Calls to infringe upon the right to keep and bear arms is a call to action to violate federal law. Well, actually, it is an attack on speech. First Amendment, because the NRA speaks for gun rights. Yes, an Attorney General in the state of New York has determined he's going to try and shut down he's going to dissolve the National Rifle Association. Good luck with that. On what grounds are you going to shut it down? Are you going to shut it down on the grounds that it's a monopoly? They don't own anything. It's an advocacy group. When you really get down to it, Steve, I think that's just grandstanding. I think it's a guy who's looking for publicity. He's just a politician looking to increase his stature. I'm gonna ban the NRA. No, you're not. But you get to tell all your friends you tried, and that's the important thing. You can't. This is the essence of progressivism. It's not whether you can do something or not. It's not whether you want to help or not. It all comes down to, how does this make me look? And it's a she? Well, of course. Of course it is. Okay, congratulations. You've had your press cycle for the day. You've made the news around the country, maybe around the world. And tomorrow, no one will know who you are again, because you've had your 15 minutes of fame by saying, I'm going to make the NRA illegal. With that said, New York, in so many ways, has taken itself out of the Union. You cannot carry weapons in or out of New York. I know Jeremy had nearly got into major trouble because he had a rifle that he declared and that he said was with him, and he was stopping by in New York, going from one place to another. And it's not like he's hiding it. It's not like it's a concealed weapon, even though that wouldn't matter. But they damn near didn't let him, back on the plane or out of the city. So, in any event, but what they're doing is they're basically virtue signaling, and they're doing something else too, and that is they're kind of prepping the battle space. They're basically trying to put things on the table that seem like they're so ridiculous that they shouldn't be on the table. But once somebody puts it on the table, it's on the table. And then when you come back to it, it's not as far out there as it used to be. This is the strategy of the left in everything. When you get to the point where, in order to be a democratic woman, you've got to not only be willing to have abortions, but you've got to be enthusiastically in favor of as many of them as possible. That position would have been so radical in the 50s and even in the 60s and 70s that people would have just taken you out of town on a rail. But if that now is the default position, then when people say things like, well, we should be able to terminate a pregnancy within the first year after birth. If I just decide I don't like the kid or it's too much trouble, should be able to just kill him. That has been floated. It's not mainstream yet, but it's been floated. So I think that's a lot of it too, Steve. I think people are just basically saying, hey, let's put everything on the table so now we talk about it, and then at least it's not inconceivable. But look, I think that I think it was Instapundit, I think Glenn Reynolds, I saw the story today or yesterday, basically said that the New York Attorney General just made an enormous donation in kind to the Donald Trump re-election campaign, and I think that's exactly right. I think the further left they go, and they're going left faster than they can spin their little wheels, the further left they go, the worse it gets for them, and the fewer people left who can, pull the lever for the D in any kind of conscience. So I think that's pretty much it. Steve, got another question below that, but I'll come back to you if I have time. Martin Archer. I don't see Mike Pence as a good successor to Trump in 24. Not if we're going to keep winning this culture war. How about this? In a cabinet shakeup early next year, Trump moves Pence to some such other top position and makes Richard Grenell the new VP. This would give the Republicans the first openly gay president, not to mention an excellent man to continue the fight to drain the swamp and take the fight to the leftists. I think I've heard good things about Richard Grenell, and I don't much care if he's gay or not. It doesn't really have any impact on me, but I don't want to select a candidate because he's gay. There's a difference between having a candidate that's a great candidate who happens to be gay and then selecting this guy because he's gay. And Buttigieg, I thought, was an example of that. There's nothing about Buttigieg that would have been interesting, or he would not have been on that stage at all if he'd been straight. But he was like, see, we've got a gay candidate. I don't know. Pence has been great. He's been loyal, and just by happy coincidence, look over here, Mobile Mondo says that Pence has been granite on space exploration. I hope that means in a good way, because I think he's been doing a real good job. So people are saying Grenell's a constitutionalist, a terrific ambassador to Germany. I have no doubt, and he may be exactly the right guy. But I hope if he is the right guy, it's because he's the right guy and not the Republicans' gay guy. This is a terrible trap to fall into. I remember talking with Zoe, it's been 12 years ago now, my God, coming out of a meeting with conservatives, and he was really quite downcast about things. And I said, what's bugging you, man? He said, he's coming out of a conservative group. He says, everybody's very nice and stuff, but it's like, since you're our black conservative and you're black conservative and you're black this and you're black that, and he said, can it just be a guy, can I just be a guy? And I thought, man, I'm so with you. I completely get it. And I think that's a very tough thing to do. I haven't seen him speak. I don't know anything about him. I'll certainly start looking at him a lot more closely in terms of material. I think Nikki Haley has real potential. Some people just get the hives when her name is mentioned, but I don't know. I think she's really, really good. We'll see. It wouldn't hurt if he was gay, and having a gay Republican would, to some degree, convince people who bought this whole thing that it's kind of tough to square that circle. But nevertheless, again, and it may sound like splitting hairs, but I don't think it is. I think it's really important. If he's a good candidate and good for the country, then I'd vote for him because he's a constitutionalist, not because he's our gay candidate who's got a good chance to convince Democrats. So he's got a chance to win. I'm not saying you said that. I'm not saying that's the argument you're making, Martin, but that's just kind of what I want to get out there. Eric Blake, hey Bill, you may recall I once asked your 3 to 5 favorite films. Now, what are your 3 least favorite movies of all time, or the first 3 plus hatred-inducing movies you can think of at the top of your head, and why? I'll keep count. Meantime, no Star Wars movies allowed. Okay, the first, the movie I remember hating the most, I didn't even see it, was Redacted. I didn't go see it. It was in the middle of the Gulf War. My book, Silent America, made more money in theaters than Redacted did. It was basically a story about how American troops are all a bunch of murderers, and so on and so on and so on. And it was written, I want to say it was directed by, it's not Michael Mann, I don't think. The guy who directed Scarface is blown out of my head. In any event, it'll come to me. It'll come to you. I hated that movie because I know there were a lot of young actors, and some of them were vets who had to, in order to get their acting career started, had to go and portray themselves as murderers. So that's not good. What did I just? I don't know. I'm trying to. It seems like I don't really stay with movies I hate very long. I'm trying to think if anything just flops into my mind. I resaw Witches of Eastwick with Natasha a couple months ago. I saw it when it came out. When I saw it again, I hated it. I mean, I hated it. So anyway, to be honest with you, Eric, I can't really answer the questions. Not that I don't want to. It's just that they don't stand out. There's a lot of stuff I don't like, and it just kind of. Brian De Palma, thank you. Yes, I just, let's just go with I hate everything unless you hear otherwise. That's probably the safe answer there. Moving on, Dave Olson. Speculative astronomy question. Dave, I wish I'd seen it earlier. I'm not going to take it now because I spent enough time on that, but we can definitely do some more in the near future. So sorry, if you've got another one, I'll take it, but I'm going to skip on that. Then we have Martin Archer and Eric Blake again. I'll come back to them if we have enough. Bob Knife. Neef. Sorry, Bob, I can never remember which one that is. Oh, it's another astronomy question. Are there really light waves coming to Earth reflecting from some 1-inch quartz crystal on a planet from a star somewhere in a galaxy millions of light years away? Yes, they are coming to us from millions of light years away. A piece of crystal the size of my fist. The problem is they're just not very strong. Light reflects everywhere, and obviously I'm being flip. I don't think there's a transmitter there, if that's what you're asking, but I just thought it's a clever way to answer the question, because honestly, once you get the theory, it's important to get the theory right. There's light coming to us from everywhere. So if there is a planet with a crystal that's sending us a beam of light, then yes, we're receiving it, but it's not coming through loud and clear. That's something I could probably tell you with some confidence. Again, I'll come back to these if we chew through them all. Merlin, how are you, buddy? By definition, conservatism is maintaining the way things are. By definition, liberalism is the divisive force that departs from that traditional reality. So by what gall do those commie bastards call Trump divisive? Yeah, well, this is where they call him divisive, Merlin. Trump is dividing people from their 50-year effort to make sure that only one opinion is heard, and that opinion is their opinion. He's dividing people from the work that they've been so hard at doing for the last 50, 60 years. Um, Calling Trump divisive is the same as saying, Republican far right reaction to this perfectly reasonable Marxist organization or whatever. It's all just language designed to make people feel like they're on the wrong side of an issue morally. Sometimes they go for the wrong side of history as well, but basically what they're trying to say is Trump's an evil guy, and if you follow him, then you're evil too. And it's effective. It's actually very effective. Um, and all you have to do is live in LA to realize how effective it is. Nobody I've ever heard in a table talking loud enough about how much they supported Donald Trump in California, because other Californians would probably stand up and throw water in their face and so on. It's generally not something you want to do. But nevertheless, um, uh, it's 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 just part of the strategy. And it's true that conservatism is essentially maintaining things the way they are. That's basically right. But liberalism is not necessarily a divisive force. We're all liberals when it came to issues like private property. It was an extremely liberal idea, traditional liberal idea. We don't need to go down that road again. But again, it's just something about that that's made it sound a little off. It's like we're in favor of not conserving every idea and holding on to every idea. We just think that if we find something that really works, we should hold on to that. And that most new ideas are not very good. Just seems to be the way it is. Just like most mutations don't do much good either. But anyway, yeah, it's all just, he's a tyrant, he's a dictator, he's a Russian puppet, he's a Chinese puppet, he's an idiot, he's a mastermind, and it's the flavor of the second, and he's anything but, competent or credible or reasonable or whatever. And so when they talk about Trump, don't ever forget this. Whatever they say about Trump, they're saying about you. Don't ever forget that. Um, anyway, that's that. Let's move on. Daryl Green, how do you think the school shutdowns and virtual classes are going to affect our children? I saw someone post a picture of a 13-year-old crying her eyes out when told there would be nothing but virtual classes for the upcoming school year. For children, school is an enormous part of their lives and the greatest social interaction they have. To remove that is huge for them. Absolutely right. And especially interesting considering that the number of COVID-19 fatalities among that age group is the nearest round number is 0, and it's 0 to many decimal places. How can they say they're going to cancel school for the rest of, I guess for the rest of the year is the fall semester? It's a big deal, and we shouldn't be doing it. And countries that aren't doing it are not doing any better than we are. The whole thing is really, really reaching on a daily basis, although not nearly as dramatically as it was back in the end of April and May, to be honest with you, Daryl. But every day there's just more and more evidence that there's something really, 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 really fishy going on here. And I think the whole thing can be explained. Well, it's tempting to explain it by masterminding evil. I think really the simplest explanation for all of this COVID-19 overreaction is that progressives are cowards. That's why they like progressivism. The state will take care of me, it'll protect me, and if I get the guns away from the hands of people who I can take them away from, then I don't have to worry about getting shot. And the idea that I can't touch the guns that belong to the people that would actually shoot me, that's not something I can control, so we'll just forget about that. And this business about us having to basically go to our tornado shelters for the next 10 years until the vaccine is, it's not what we were sold because we wouldn't have bought it. And furthermore, it gets more and more absurd every single day. My attitude about the COVID-19 thing at this point, and has been really since middle of April, to be honest with you, which when we were doing the Stratosphere Lounge when I got the word, thanks to the comment section, we're doing the middle of the show when I learned that my state was getting locked down at midnight, and after midnight, no one's allowed out of on the roads. And they said it was going to be for a month, and I said, a month? Nobody can keep you. A month is ridiculous. Why don't we look at this in in 2 weeks on the outside. Well, that was 4 months ago. Yeah. So here's what I think the answer for COVID ought to be. I think if you want to stay home, you can stay home, and if you don't, then you don't. And this idea, I mentioned this in a show I did, Bill Whittle Now, I did recently. It may not be posted yet. I think it might be the show about UConn, about the Huskies saying they're not going to play football this year. Scott did what he does so well, and what he gets, basically what makes the whole show work is so are you saying just go on out there and take your casualties? And I thought, yeah, that's what I'm saying, actually. That's exactly what I'm saying when I think about it. Yeah, let's go out there and take our casualties. Oh, you just don't care. You're some teacher somewhere, I saw this earlier today on Campus Watch, said in the classroom that Republicans are a death cult and they're spreaders of plague because they're not cowering at home in their masks and so on. Okay. That's the sound of somebody who's really afraid of things, you know. I don't want to overstate this because I don't want to overstate the COVID thing, but to be perfectly honest with you, I'll just come out and say it. Once you get over your fear of dying, life gets a whole lot simpler. It really does. It gets a lot easier and a lot more fun. Once you just get over it, either through accepting it or strong belief in religious belief or afterlife or whatever. Once you just realize, hey, I've had a good run and I did a lot of things that I didn't think I'd get to do. Once you get comfortable with the idea that you won't be here anymore someday, then everything is actually pretty cool. It's like, what's the worst that can happen? It's like, well, you get killed. Okay, well, I'm going anyway, so might as well, try and get as much life in as I can because the clock is ticking. But for people like this guy who said the GOP is a death cult, spreader of plagues, and I know this sounds a bit contradictory, but I don't think it is if you get deeper into it. For them, the worst thing that can happen is that they'll die. And you could probably say, well, that's probably true for everybody. But to live your life in that level of fear all the time has got to be terrible. Of all the people out there, of all of the diseases, physical diseases, emotional diseases, mental illness, God knows I've suffered from some of that. I've seen some things and I've lived through some things and so on and so on and so on. But I've never been afflicted by the one thing that I find to be the most horrific condition that could affect a human being, and that is to be a germaphobe. I think that must be the most horrible, horrible fate that can befall a human being. I genuinely mean it. I think that must be torture. Torture. To believe that you live in a world where everything is out to kill you all the time, and only through the ritualistic application of things like hand sanitizers and washing your hands and holding a tissue when you turn a door handle. I honestly think that is the worst fate that can befall you. It means that your entire life, every second of the day, is in a state of perpetual fear, that you are constantly being surrounded, constantly being attacked, and it's just, if you let down your guard for 1 second, then this is going to get in and you're done. It's terrible, 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 terrible. Martin Archer says, try my back pain. Martin, I know you have severe back pain, and I've had moments of severe pain, not chronic severe pain. But this is, I would think this is worse. This is constant fear. We have Roy say, I'm a germaphobe, I'm always getting sick, but man, I'm not as bad as what you're talking about. Well, I'm talking about the people who are really immobilized by it. Howie Mandel, Mobomoto said Howie Mandel is probably the most high-profile germaphobe. But for a person who's a genuine germaphobe who feels like if you step out of this house, forget step out of the house, if you're not constantly sanitizing things and then germs everywhere in their building, I just really feel sorry for that. I really do. I don't mean this in a derogatory or a negative way, or certainly not in a making fun kind of way. I just think it's a personal horror. Now, my wife is considerably more worried about germs and infections than I am because I'm not worried about them at all. At all. I never give it a second thought, ever. It just never, ever occurs to me. I never had anything other than complete confidence in my immune system to deal with things. And the things that it can't deal with, then those are going to be serious things. And strangely enough, the more of that you feel, the more true it becomes true, because if you're not obsessed with eliminating germs from your environment, then you're exposed to more germs. And the more germs you're exposed to, the stronger your immune system becomes. Also, I don't know to what degree this measures in, but if you have peace of mind, that's good for your immune system. And if you have confidence in your immune system, it's actually good for your immune system. Reduces stress on you. So, but to the thing about the kids, I understand them crying. I just don't think they should have to be put through it. I think, I think you have. John Pershing says, at least in the 1918 pandemic, they had cocaine in their soda. Well said. Good point. But I guess what I'm saying is, while I'm very sorry for that 13-year-old, I genuinely am. All of their friends, all of it. And I'm especially sorry for the class of 2020, high school class of 2020. Didn't get a prom, didn't get a graduation ceremony, got a lot of lawn signs, but just didn't get their prom and all these things that people have been looking forward to. And I feel very, very genuinely sorry for them. I really do. And what I'm about to say doesn't minimize my genuine sorrow that they got that taken away from them. But ultimately, life doesn't owe you anything, and the idea that you have a legally actionable right to go through life without having anything bad happen to you or anything catastrophic is it's kind of a late stage civilization, kind of a thing. I constantly point out, because I think it needs to be pointed out, yes, there's a new way to die now, and I'm not trying to minimize it. It's significant. I don't know what the numbers will be at the end of the year. I did some math at the end of June, and it looked like that by the end of 2020, it looks like COVID-19 will be probably the number 4 killer of Americans this year. It's not trivial. Maybe higher. It's probably going to be right around number 4, I want to say. It's not going to touch heart disease. It's not going to touch cancer, but it might beat accidents and so on. And that's real. But it's time to face it. Yes, that's right. You now have a new way to die. It's not a terribly lethal disease, and the younger and healthier you are, as in the case of school kids, the more likely you are to survive it, to the point where the chance of you succumbing to it is so statistically unlikely that you really are talking about closing schools down because somebody could get hit by a car on the way to school, and that's about the likelihood or lower in terms of the COVID risk to young people. I never thought, and I still don't think we should just say, oh, too bad for old people or sick people, just get rid of them. But clearly, when the cure becomes worse than the disease, it's time to build a wall not around society, but around the vulnerable. And build a wall around them and do our level best to make sure that doesn't get through to them until we have a vaccine. But if your choice is, do I want to get myself exposed to COVID-19 or do I want to starve to death? I'm going to go with the COVID-19. I'm going to go with the COVID-19 even if I've got emphysema. I'm going to go with COVID-19. And we're not at that point yet, obviously, but from the sound of the people who are running this thing in terms of the politics, they basically are saying better that you starve to death than that you get COVID-19, better that your kids have emotional breakdowns or suicide rates go up or whatever. Anything's better than getting COVID-19. And I just think that's absolutely, absolutely absurd. One of the very first things I said about this in the early days is that when it's all said and done, I think we'll look at COVID-19 as a useful drill, as in a fire drill, because we'll have learned an awful lot about things like stopping viral spread and social distancing and all that stuff, and we'll have learned it on a disease that is actually pretty benign as these things go. If this were aerosolized Ebola, we'd all be having a different conversation. But it's not. And that's the important thing. It's not. All these control methods, I think the left is using COVID-19 and everything else, George Floyd, all of it. They're using it. They know they're running out of time. I think they know they're losing, believe it or not. I think they know they're losing, and they're going long because if Trump gets reelected, then the investigations and the jail time is coming, which I think should have happened in year one of Trump's administration. But, you get what you get. Let's see here. Dave Crayon. I'm sorry, it's an astronomy question. Dave, I beg your pardon. I should probably look at those earlier as another astronomy question. Oh, here's one from same guy. Dave Crayon, what's your opinion on America's special relationship with the UK? Is it still relevant in the 21st century? Also, what country do you feel is America's greatest ally? Thank you for putting it that way. We do have a special relationship with the UK. We not only two large population countries with powerful economies that speak the same language, but because of the UK, you can also throw Canada, Australia, and New Zealand into that boat, and you can also make a pretty good case for things like Hong Kong, India, and so on. All of the Anglosphere, that's how I've heard the term before, benefits, as John Galt just said, from English common law, absolutely right. But they also benefit from speaking the same language. And the reason that we're in kind of a unique place in terms of big history is because, to my knowledge, there has never been a top dog world leading empire that has been succeeded by another world leading empire that speaks the same language. I mean, the Egyptians are usurped by the Greeks, who are usurped by the Romans, who are usurped by the Goths or the French or the Spanish or whatever. But for the British to basically own the world through 1800s and 1900s, then for America to take over that position and speak the same language, puts English into a category that may not have even existed for French back when it was the lingua franca, the language that everybody spoke. Two, not generations, two epochs speaking English. That's a big deal. And yes, we have a special relationship with it. But when I say special relationship, I mean those people that understand and love America as America was created have a special relationship with those people who love and understand Great Britain as Great Britain was created. And the left is working very hard to make sure that neither one of those two citizens still exist in the future in either America or Britain. I don't know if they're going to succeed or not. But Britain certainly isn't what it used to be, and neither is America for that matter. The question is, since the left is incapable of, since it's so fundamentally childish, this is why left-wing revolutions always devour their own, because there's a fundamental childishness about it. The American Revolution was different from the French Revolution because it wasn't an orgy of passion. Extraordinary popular delusions and the madness of crowds did not really happen in America. Happened in the Russian Revolution, happened in the French Revolution, happened in the Chinese Communist Revolution. It's usually the definition of a revolution, is everybody running around like chickens with their head cut off, and it's all just destruction and death. And when you call for the death of the king or the death of the aristocrats or off with their head or whatever, fine. But once you get that taste of blood in your mouth, you don't generally let off too much, because left-wing revolutions are all about violence and murder. It's an excuse to go out and break and kill things. And the American Revolution stands as a stark contrast to that. And a lot of that, and virtually all of it, is from our heritage from Great Britain. It's been widely pointed out that Gandhi said something to the effect of, passive resistance is the way to go, and even if we were dealing with Hitler, we shouldn't fight back. We should just passively resist him. And somebody has basically endlessly pointed out passive resistance works against the British because the British are fundamentally decent and moral people. If you tried passive resistance against Hitler, even if you did nothing, even if you fought, you're going to be exterminated. Um, Passive resistance is based on shaming people into, it's a strategy of shaming people with a conscience into stop doing something. And that was the genius of Gandhi, was to recognize that the British people were fundamentally decent, had a conscience, and if he could point out to them how unjust their rule was, they'd get themselves out of there. That's pretty much it. Um, so that's kind of the special relationship part. The other question I think is really interesting is, who do I feel is America's greatest ally? Certainly Great Britain is our greatest ally in terms of the closeness of the bond. Canada, Australia, not so much New Zealand, but Australia, Canada, Great Britain are, they're four cousins, very tight. But in terms of strategic value, while I would have gone with Britain even as late as maybe 2000, since then I would say they're still my favorite country, they're still my favorite ally. But in terms of, if I'm playing Risk and I get a chance to pick a color on the board, I'm going with India. That's who I think we should have. I think we should be courting India in every way, for a number of reasons. A huge population, hardworking people. They have a great deal of experience with the British legal system, having been the jewel of the empire for so long. They are emerging from tremendous poverty, which means that they're still motivated to work hard and appreciate hard work and so on. And there are an awful lot of them, and generally speaking, hardworking people and people who value an education when they have a chance to be exposed to one. And I think they are our best ally in the future. And their strategic position doesn't hurt any either. They're just to the west of China. They're just to the south of Russia. That whole Indian subcontinent is essentially the pivot of the old world. And if I had to pick a country to really tie ourselves to looking forward for the next 50 years, 100 years, unless something really changes in India, and I don't think it will. I think India's going to get more and more liberal, more and more free, liberal in a good way. So I'd have to go with India on that one. A little bit longer. Oh my God, how did I miss that? Dave Olson, any thoughts on the 75th glorious anniversary of Japan's baptism with the white hot light of freedom? It's actually the bright white light of freedom. How did I not post the atomic bomb afterburner? That really pisses me off. I really was prepared to do it. I've got it on a hard drive, and it's been living on PJTV forever. I'm going to post it on our site. And it's a big anniversary, too, 75 years. Yeah. John says do it on the 9th. And I guess that's really the only point now. But yes, it needs to be out there. So I think prior to the Apollo 11 Cold War things, the best work I did. And it's because I did a lot of research on it. Same with the Cold War, and the same with Apollo 11. By the way, for the upcoming series, it looks like we haven't had official approval yet, but it looks like episode 1 is going to be John Paul Jones. I think we're going to call it America's Forgotten Heroes. I think John Paul Jones will be number 1. I think Frank Luke will be number 2. Booker T. Washington, number 3. Ernest Evans, number 4. And then there are a couple up in there, but I'm thinking about Dick Rutan for number 5, not Bert, Dick, because that around the world flight was amazing. And if you can't tell Dick's story without telling Bert's, and vice versa. but what we're looking for is, and it's tough. You got to find somebody who's not well known to history, and they have to have done something that's dramatic to tell, and then you can kind of back out more into their lives and the rest. Yeah, Frank Luke. Frank Luke. It is Frank, isn't it? I'm sure it is. Yep, Frank Luke. Norman Borlaug is in there, and I'm trying to do Norman. I don't know Norman's story well enough. The problem with Norman is that, as it pointed out to me, it's like the problem with making wheat grow is kind of like watching paint dry. So Norman's going to be more of a challenge, but he is a person who is an American hero who needs to be remembered. Frank Luke was the second leading ace of World War One. Eddie Rickenbacker was first. I want to say he had 26 victories, something like that. Luke had, it was 17, 18. It slipped my mind. He got them all in a very short period of time. He was from Arizona, real wildcat kind of guy, off on his own. And they called him the balloon buster because he specialized in observation balloons, which were by far the most deadly target to attack in World War One. World War One was a war of artillery. Artillery did almost all of the killing in World War One. And in order to get your artillery to land where it's supposed to, you need to have a spotter. And since most of France was pretty flat, artillery observation balloons and also later reconnaissance flights were really important. And so so shooting down enemy observation balloons was important. And because it was important, they were heavily defended by huge amounts of anti-aircraft batteries surrounding them. They often had fighter cover flying overhead while they were up. And furthermore, they could reel those things back down real fast, shockingly fast. And Frank Luke was kind of this just hell for leather guy who, like, if you take a look at him, I want to say he was 19 when he died. He might have been 21. He wasn't any older than that. But he looks like he should be played by James Dean. He's a real handsome guy. And Frank Luke basically had one partner, and the two of them would just go out together, just the two of them, because it was too dangerous to take anybody else to just get killed. And Frank's partner, I want to say it was not Werner, it was a German kind of name, would fly top cover and hold off the fighters, and Frank would just dive down and shoot down the balloons. They were both flying SPADs. I think they were probably SPAD 7s. They might have been 13s, but I think end of the war might have been 13s, come to think of it. SPAD is not a terribly maneuverable fighter. It's made by the French. SPAD is an acronym for something. The Société pour l'Aviation. But the SPAD was not a great dogfighter. But if you look at the SPAD compared to anything else, and I mean anything else in that war, the SPAD looks like a bullet. It's indestructible. It's built like a bulldog. It's like a shaved bear. Even the trailing edges have these kind of scalloped trailing edges, almost like they're flying so fast that the fabric's going to come off. In a war where aircraft were notorious for falling apart, the Nieuports probably killed as many pilots by snapping their wings off as they did getting shot down. But the SPAD had very bad visibility and not a great turn radius, but it was built to dive. It was the strongest fighter of the war, I think, by a wide margin. Really just a flying tank. So he'd fly over these balloons. He'd have his friends stay up there in top cover. He'd go down and he would use incendiary bullets that would ignite the hydrogen in the balloons. He got a lot of balloons. And he did all of his flying in the space of a couple months. And the reason I think that he's important is not just because of his record and how quickly he got it and the fact that nobody knows who he is. Luke Air Force Base in Arizona is named after him. Thank you very much. This is so great to have a hive mind. Mobile Moto says, Société pour l'Aviation et ses dérivés. I guess that means the Society for Aviation and its derivatives, if I had to guess. Anyway, it's a manufacturing company, and it's called SPAD. Excuse me. Anyway, the thing that really kind of sets Frank Luke aside is that he got shot down, got shot through the shoulder, I think, or through the took a serious wound from a ground battery, anti-aircraft battery. So he's trying to land the plane. He's kind of graying out and blacking out, and he's trying to get his plane down on the ground. He sees a field, but on the way down, as he's about to make this emergency landing, because he's passing out from loss of blood, he does take time to slightly divert, strafe a bunch of Germans that were on the ground, German troop formations. So, so he makes a safe landing. He's still in his SPAD. He sees a German patrol coming up to take his surrender, which was common. You get shot down in World War I, you put your hands up, your war's over. The World War I Germans were not the Nazis, and besides, you haven't bombed, the entire population. Generally speaking, if you got shot down behind enemy lines, you were taken prisoner, and that's that. Well, they came after Frank Luke, and Frank Luke reached into his side and he got out his .45 automatic. And they said when they found Frank Luke's body, Frank Luke was dead, probably from the original wound. And the legend says that there were also 7 dead infantrymen right in front of him, that he fired 7 rounds out of his .45 and killed somebody with every round. He wasn't going to be taken alive. He just wouldn't. He was the first American aviator to be awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. And nobody knows who he is. So these are the kind of stories I like to tell. I think it's long overdue, especially as our history is being torn down all around us. So that's definitely the idea. I think I'll just do 2 more if you don't mind. Yeah, because I'm kind of hungry and I need to go. So 2 more we'll do. Michael Wilson. Are you worried about any possible VP candidates for Joe Biden? Could any of them cause a significant difference in voter turnout with the more moderate left? Well, fortunately for us, Biden has already locked out half of the potentially dangerous candidates by declaring it's going to be a woman, and given the year, the politics, and the general atmosphere on the left, I think it's virtually guaranteed that it's going to be a black woman. I think that's virtually guaranteed, which narrows down the field an awful lot. So I don't see many people out there on the Democratic side that I consider to be most of a threat. I'll tell you, if I had to answer your question honestly, excuse me, the 2 people that I would be most worried about would be either Oprah Winfrey or Michelle Obama. Because their positive approval ratings are so high, they could do the whole outsider thing. They've never been really attacked before, but at the same time, you got to be careful about attacking like Michelle Obama. Of course, everybody was careful about attacking Barack Obama too. I think the reason that ultimately I'm not too worried about any of it is getting very clear that whoever Joe Biden's vice presidential nominee is going to be the president of the United States if the Democrats win the election. And while I think a lot of people still have a very high opinion of Michelle Obama, which is a mystery to me, and Oprah, which is less of a mystery to me, those 2 kind of candidates are potentially, they're such wild cards that you just can't really predict. The Mobile Moto says they're both raging anti-Semites and bigots against white people. There's a lot of evidence for that. Maybe that would come out. Black women would die for Michelle. True. Question is, would black men? Probably not so many. But Martin Archer, I think, has got it. I think it's just, I don't think either one of them would take the offer. I don't see what they'd get out of it. First of all, you'd have to win the election. And there's that. And then your chance of actually winning the election, since let's say Michelle Obama or Oprah would be the presidential nominee, Biden's just staggering across the line. you have a lot of people who may really like Michelle Obama or Oprah Winfrey, but may not feel like they're ready to be president of the United States. And I think that there would be enough negative backlash that any positive gain would not really come through. But I worry about them to some degree. One nice thing about the structure of things is that the worst case that can happen is if it was Michelle Obama or Oprah Winfrey, they get to debate Pence. They don't get a shot at Trump directly. I think that's the thing I'd be most worried about. But I'm not terribly worried. I mean, the NRA is growing by 1,000 members a day, and both and any number of other things that make you want to believe that Americans are not so happy with this idea of watching their cities burn, and maybe it's not a bad idea to have a police force after all. I was coming out of a drugstore last night, pretty late, and there were 4 policemen outside, LA cops, and we're wearing our masks, and came out as I often do when I see them, as I always do when I see them. I said, "You guys are doing a great job out there. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise." And there was just a moment, and I mean it was like that, where just for a flash you could see they were like, just for a moment, they weren't cops, They were actual people. I know they're real people, needless to say, that's why I said that, but there was just a moment when you're like, oh, somebody's not giving us crap, somebody's telling us something nice. Yeah. So I think the quiet people are going to come out hard to vote for this one, and I think it's going to be really difficult to beat Trump, especially Biden. I think I'd be more worried about Bernie than I would about Biden. Bernie gets some people excited. He gets the idiots excited, but nobody gets excited about Joe Biden. Nobody is excited about Joe Biden. They may be excited that they think he's the best bet to beat Donald Trump, but nobody's like, wow, Biden. Now we'll do last one. John Galt, CSA. Regarding today's Bill Whittle Now about the Yale refund lawsuit, both my kids went to elite schools, and the professors and people they met there provided career opportunities far beyond the impressive educations they received. My daughter connected with Dr. Adam Grant. Wow, it's a long one. At Wharton, the guru of modern organizational theory used at Silicon Valley in the most successful companies these days, and she's now enjoying a meteoric career in that field. My son did cutting-edge research with AI pioneer Patrick Winston at MIT, which he's now applying as one of the key people at a $2 billion startup in the oncology field. Was working with these brilliant pioneers and incredible support networks they built up that propelled them along their incredible trajectories. None of that would have been possible had they attended Zoom school. According to my kids, the undergraduate education at Yale and Harvard are totally overrated, and it is only the networking connections available there that makes them worth the price of admission. Without those, all the kids get for their $60K a year is a piece of paper that opens doors and a mediocre education that won't serve them well once they step aside, refund justified. So in the episode about suing Yale, Scott said a Yale student is suing Yale University for having the second half of that semester be online video. And I said, I don't think there's grounds for that lawsuit. I think it's a force majeure. It's an act of God. Yale didn't pull the bait and switch. The whole country took a haircut, and now you get to take a haircut too. It's entirely different going forward. If you're saying now should they pay the same tuition for the next semester, absolutely not. But the argument I made there applies to this too. You cannot quantify that aspect of the education. I'm sure it's true, but you can't put a dollar value on it. You can't guarantee it. The reason I think that the guy's not entitled to a refund, as I mentioned in the show, was because he got his Yale credits. He got college credits for the time served. That's what he's actually paying for. I'm not for a minute pretending to say that he got the education or the connections or any of the other benefits he would have gotten if he had continued to go to school and there had been no COVID-19. But nevertheless, you can't really blame Yale for something that happened in the middle of the semester. What you pay for when you go to college is a college credit. That's what you pay for. And that is a quantifiable commodity. All of the connections are certainly, I have no doubt that's the reason you would go to Yale, but you can't put a price on that, and you can't guarantee it. You can't. If I buy a college credit at Yale and I pass the class, I get the credit. I have no guarantee that I'm going to get connections or that the connections will pay off or anything else like that. Now, no doubt everything that you said is true, John, is absolutely true, but um, it becomes less true every day. The um, Harvard and Yale are 5 or 6 years maybe behind, maybe less, the New York Times and CNN. They sold credibility. That's what they sold. And you'd think they were selling education. No, they're selling credibility. CNN was selling news. No, they're selling credibility. Um, and and when Harvard students are talking about safe spaces and making sure that under no circumstances they get to hear Ben Shapiro or Milo or any of that other stuff, then the reputation of Harvard and Yale, that is what made Harvard and Yale, is being eroded very, very quickly. And that's certainly the case. And the cachet associated with those degrees are rapidly disappearing. In other words, just as time goes on, not only does the Harvard degree, the piece of paper, mean less and less and less, it also means you get to meet fewer and fewer people who are the kind of outstanding individuals that you mentioned in your question here, who can really be um, uh, game changers. By the way, certainly you should take this as a compliment. The story about your son and daughter having connected with these outstanding personalities through the connections at Yale and then going on to great careers, I would certainly take that as a compliment, but to assume that that happens automatically by going to Yale is a pretty big assumption. I don't think that that has an. I'm not saying it doesn't have anything to do with Yale, but I am saying that it certainly means there's something exceptional about your son and daughter, because these people don't take everybody that graduates from Yale doesn't suddenly find themselves working with people of that quality. So, is a Yale education on Zoom worth the same as an education on campus? Absolutely not. And I never argued that it was. All I said was that I don't think that the guy has a right to sue the university for something that happens in the middle of the school year, so long as he got his school credits. I mean, that just seems to be reasonable to me. Going forward is an entirely different story. But that's that. All right, I'm tired of looking in the lights here, so I'm going to call it a night and head home. As always, this show is made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, and it's always a pleasure being here for you wonderful people. We will be back again next Thursday. And until then, I hope everybody's a great time out there, and go on and live your lives as much as you possibly can until our overlords decide that they've waved their perfumed handkerchiefs in our general direction and allowed us to leave our cottages for a brief holiday. That'd be nice. Anyway, thanks very much for joining us, and we will see you again right here next time on the Stratosphere Lounge.